I'll call to order the September 11th, 2017 regular business meeting of City Council. Given the events of this day in 2001, I think it's fitting that we observe a moment of silence, remembrance of those Americans who lost their lives and the first responders who gave their lives in the service to others. So let us rise and observe a moment of silence, and then Mr. Hamp will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll remind those in attendance, if you wish to speak during public hearing or citizens' comment, or sign-up sheets in the back. First item of business is consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to accept as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Is there a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Item 3 is, do any members of council have anything they wish to present? Nobody? All right, thank you. We'll move on to item 4A. Is upon application of the city manager to hold a public hearing and consider introducing an ordinance amending various sections of the zoning ordinances. Mr. Hamp.
Mr. Mayor Allen and members of council, the first order of business this evening is to receive the report and recommendation from the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission held a public hearing and considered the application at its August 22nd meeting, and by a vote of 6-0 forwards a recommendation of approval of the proposed text amendments with one exception, that being by a vote of 5-1, the Planning Commission recommends that electronic signs be permitted in residential districts by conditional use.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. Is there a motion to receive the recommendation of the Planning Commission?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Short, any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. The recommendation is received. Mr. Juday?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. What we have tonight is a zoning text amendment package. The zoning ordinance consists of text that defines each of the districts and explains what is allowed in each district, and then also a map. Most of the rezonings that you deal with are changing the zoning designation on the map. This is actually changing the text of the zoning ordinance. So it is not rezoning anything, though it will be related to a rezoning happening after this. We have basically 4 proposals today. Again, the applicant for this text amendment package is the city manager's office. It's the city staff, so we don't have an applicant to speak to us about it. The first one deals with microbreweries and brew pubs. Currently, our ordinance only has one use, brewery, and that can be anything from a tiny little brew pub all the way up to a Miller Coors plant. And because of that, they're only allowed in heavy industrial districts. We currently have a microbrewery in the city, the Basic City Brewery, that's done very well. And obviously, as you know, microbreweries are becoming more popular around the region. We'd like to add those to our zoning ordinance and allow them in more districts besides just heavy industrial. So our proposal is to add a definition for microbrewery and allow it by right in the highway business, light industrial, and heavy industrial districts, and then by conditional use permit in the local business and central business downtown districts. We'd also like to add brew pubs to the zoning ordinance by right in local business, central business, and highway business districts. We've also added definitions for these 2 terms and use standards for both. A microbrewery is a brewery that produces less than 15,000 barrels per year. If you produce more than that, that knocks you into a different ABC designation. That's why that's the cutoff for us. We also require you, if you start a microbrewery in a commercial district, to have some kind of attached tasting room or restaurant or something that will contribute to pedestrian traffic and activity in that area. And then a brew pub is a brewery that produces less than 3,000 barrels and where most of the beer is consumed on premises in a restaurant. We believe that this is a good change to the ordinance because it will allow us to take advantage of kind of the groundswell of interest in microbreweries. And we think that the current ordinance is outdated, just confining them to heavy industrial districts. The second change is a change to the parking ratio requirements. We currently, for all coffee shops and fast food restaurants with a drive-through, require one parking space for every 50 square feet of floor area. All other kinds of restaurants, we require one parking space for every 100 square feet of floor area. Basically, the one space per 50 square foot is just kind of unreasonably high. It's much higher than any other city in our region. And it's also so high that it's been functionally unenforceable by the zoning department lately. It just kind of slipped past us during the zoning ordinance rewrite. To give you a general idea of why that might be so ridiculously high, if you think about a standard parking space in an off-street lot, with your drive lanes and everything, you're adding about 250 square feet of parking lot for every space that you add. So you're talking about 5 times as much parking lot as floor area. And so that is just kind of an unreasonable restriction. This change would bring it into kind of more reasonable territory, and would also make sure that all of our restaurant requirements are uniform. So we wouldn't have to distinguish. Sometimes there's issues of distinguishing does this count as a fast food restaurant or not a fast food restaurant, but it does have a drive-through or whatever. This would just say all restaurants, 1 per 100. The third text amendment deals with service bay doors, which are basically garage doors. When the zoning ordinance was rewritten, the current ordinance was changed to say that all service bay doors shall face away from adjacent thoroughfares, right-of-way, and residential uses. And the goal of that was to try to clean up the design of our corridors. You can see they've got a picture here of garages facing internal to the lot with buffering and shielding, so you don't have a bunch of garage doors facing your road. Unfortunately, the wording of the ordinance is a little overzealous. Because there are almost no commercial lots that are true kind of mid-block lots. Most of them have some kind of have two. Most of them are functionally corner lots, so it's difficult to face the garage door in a way that works. And it is doable for certain kinds of service businesses, like are illustrated here, where you have just a garage door on one side. But it's very difficult if you have a use that requires 2 opposite garage doors. If you have a drive-through car wash or a drive-through oil change place. We had recently an applicant proposed to build a drive-through oil change, quick oil change service center. And pretty quickly got to, as we looked at sites around the city, this ordinance functionally bans them from building that in the city. Now that's okay if you think that that's not an appropriate use in the city, but sort of good zoning practice is to say that if it's something that you don't think is a bad thing for our quality of life here, and lots of us I think use drive-through oil changes and drive-through car washes, then there should be some appropriate place for it. So when we considered what the appropriate place would be, we really thought secondary commercial streets that are off of major corridors. And so the proposal, and this is kind of us looking for some spot to place this, the reason it's overzealous is because it says should face away from all adjacent thoroughfares and right-of-way. Basically any kind of street, any kind of alley, any public right-of-way you can't face. So the proposed language is that all service bay doors shall face away from adjacent residential uses and from corridors designated in this section. That includes all of our major commercial corridors: Main Street, Broad Street, 254 Ivy, Delphine, Rosser, I-64. Doesn't currently include Ludewaite or Hopeman Parkway, but we're proposing to add them probably in our next zoning text amendment. Basically, the goal here is you can't have a garage door facing any of our major corridors, any of our entrance corridors. You can have it facing a secondary commercial street if you're back in a commercial development or off of the main road. All of these text amendments were recommended by Planning Commission on a 6-0 vote with kind of wholehearted support. The fourth one dealt with electronic changeable copy signs. And this is one that it just kind of depends on how you see it. But we currently have some confusion in our zoning ordinance. We have an ordinance that says changeable copy signs will be included as part of a permitted monument sign in any non-residential district. It doesn't state whether they're permitted in a residential district. It also says no signs that are not permanently affixed to the ground, aka a monument sign, may be considered eligible for consideration as changeable copy signs. It seems from these that they're not allowed in any residential district, but that's not entirely clear. And we've had, a recent proposal come up that caused us to try to figure out whether this ban them or not. We're proposing to just simplify that by saying, they're not allowed in any residential district, just to clarify. The Planning Commission considered this and decided that they did, the main buildings that would be affected here that would be in a residential district would be churches, civic buildings, and schools. And so as they thought about whether they wanted to ban those institutions from having changeable copy signs, they thought that in certain situations it might be acceptable to have one. So that's, they reasoned sort of the point of a conditional use permit is that there's certain situations where it would be appropriate and others where it's not. So they proposed on a 5-1 vote that the ordinance be amended to read electronic changeable copy signs may be allowed in residential districts by conditional use permit. Staff doesn't love this idea, again, because conditional use permits create, more public processes that come before you, and also we develop an expectation sometimes. So I think if my recommendation would be that if council does want to go in this direction of using the CUP, that you also move to allow staff to add some additional guidelines. Basically, we would just want to clarify, what the Planning Commission should consider as they consider a conditional use permit. It must be, on an appropriate corridor or in a, away from any nearby uses, as opposed to if you just say by conditional use permit and then you give one to the Methodist Church and then the Baptists come in the next week and say, well, they got one, why can't we get one? There's not some kind of clear language we can point to, like, this is our reasoning, this is why it's inappropriate in one place, not in another place. So that's the situation. Any questions?
Any questions of Mr. Jude?
I assume any electronic signs that may be in place now would be grandfathered.
That's correct. I think we only have one church that has one currently.
Thank you, Mr. Jude. All right, I'll hereby open the public hearing. No one signed up, Ms. Wardle? No. Then I'll hereby close the public hearing. Is there a motion to introduce this ordinance?
I'll introduce you.
You want to introduce it?
Sure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Ordinances introduced this evening will be considered at the September 25th regular business meeting. Sir?
The ordinance as amended by the Planning Commission or as proposed by the applicant?
I would propose by the applicant.
Thank you. Proposed by the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Item 4B is on application of William John Hall to hold a public hearing and consider introducing an ordinance to rezone various parcels and portions of parcels at 1006 and 1010 East Main Street, Waynesboro, Virginia, from current zoning of heavy and industrial, local businesses, and general residential to high business. Mr. Hamp.
Mayor Allen and members of council, the Planning Commission held a public hearing and considered the application again at its August 22nd meeting, and by a vote of 6-0 forwards a recommendation of approval with no conditions or proffers.
Is our motion to receive the recommendation of the commission, Planning Commission? Thank you, Mr. Short. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Is there any other discussion? If not, all in favor of receiving the recommendation of the Planning Commission, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Mr. Jude, I think you're up again.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Again, this is the Metal Crafters building, which we all know on East Main Street. There's a map of the property. It's It's roughly split into two phases. This eastern side of the property comprises the eastern half of this large parcel and then a bunch of kind of smaller subsidiary parcels around it. As you know, it was all renovated to bring in the Basic City Brewery and its parking lot fairly recently. The applicants first submitted a minor subdivision to consolidate these lots into one large lot with the eastern half of the building, and they're just working through the process of that with staff. And then they like to rezone that parcel to highway business. Most of the parcel currently falls under the heavy industrial district. Some of these auxiliary parcels here are in different districts. The main driving force behind this rezoning is the showroom. The showroom's been renovated by the owner of the building, and they'd like to rent it out. Currently, under the heavy industrial zoning, they could only rent it out for heavy industrial, manufacturing purposes. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense in this building, as you can kind of tell. Would make a lot more sense as an office or retail or some kind of restaurant. And as they kind of build out the entire Metal Crafters complex, which our comp plan designates as being for mixed use or for commercial development, they're looking at kind of a creative reuse of that space, that'll probably be largely commercial rather than manufacturing oriented. So they've asked that we rezone this whole section of the parcel to highway business to allow them to bring in a commercial use. Now, this results in rezoning the brewery as well, which, as I mentioned under the text amendment discussion, is there because it's a heavy industrial district and that's where we allow breweries. That's why we decided to go ahead and put that in the text amendment package to propose making that a conforming use. Breweries currently only allowed in the HI district. Sales and retail are not allowed in the HI district. Solving this dilemma by proposing that text amendment and proposing rezoning this to commercial. Again, this is consistent with our comprehensive plan, which designates this area for commercial and retail use and redevelopment. We think it's a suitable property for commercial development. It's on a major commercial corridor. It's a very visible building. It kind of anchors a residential area around it. It's not really an appropriate area to be doing heavy manufacturing. We believe there would be fewer environmental impacts from this because it's technically a down zoning. That means that we're taking it from a zoning district that allows a more intense use of the property to a less intense use of the property. And we have adequate infrastructure since, again, it was a large building, a large manufacturing facility, and there's significant utilities out there. Because of that, because we'd love to see the building continue to be renovated and continue to be used in creative ways, we would recommend approval with no conditions. And the Planning Commission recommended as well on a 6-0 vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jugay. Does anybody have any questions? Luke? Nope.
We have the applicant here as well. But.
I'll hereby open the public hearing.
No one has signed up to speak, but we would invite the applicant to speak if necessary, is our custom.
Yeah. Good evening. Mike Hendrickson. I'm with Matchbox Realty in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And we are the development partner with William John Hall on this project. Some of you guys are familiar with the building, been through it at some point. And basically right now we have what we believe is a wonderfully renovated building that we can't lease because of the zoning. We would love to have an office, retail, or restaurant user in this building. The front space is about 2,000 square feet, and right now we cannot do that because of the current zoning. We've had multiple conversations with different people who would like to be in this space, but we've not been able to obviously go through with any of those because of the current zoning, so that's why we're here to try and make sure that we are obviously doing things the way it should be done and make sure we get the zoning in place and then put someone in there. So we would appreciate you all considering this, and yes, as Mr. Juday said, we hope to get this portion of the project finished up with this rezoning and put a tenant in there and then look more towards the phase 2 portion, which would have a variety of different uses in there as well.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
No one else, right, Mr. Hamp?
That's correct.
All right, I'll hereby close the public hearing. Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Item 4C is to request, upon the request of DuPont, to hold a public hearing and consider adopting a resolution granting a temporary construction and access easement at 900 Essex Avenue, Public Works operation, and to undertake work under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Mr. Hamp.
Mayor Allen and members of council, in accordance with the Federal Resource Conservation Recovery Act, the DuPont Company is required to develop a corrective action plan and to remediate mercury contamination released from the Waynesboro manufacturing facility in the early to mid-20th century. You might recall that the council, about this time last year, granted an access easement to DuPont so that to facilitate the initial phase of remediation work on property that the DuPont Company owns in the vicinity of Constitution Park near the Greenway. The second phase, or the next phase of work, actually occurs on city-owned property at 900 Essex Avenue, commonly known as the Public Works Operations Facility. And this evening, DuPont is requesting that the council grant by resolution a temporary access and construction easement to accomplish that work. Broadly stated, DuPont proposes either to remove or encapsulate mercury-contaminated soils through a series of stream bank management projects. In one scenario, the contaminated soil would be removed by excavation and the riverbank restored through structural and vegetative means. In the second scenario, the mercury would be encapsulated utilizing a geotechnical mat or biochar and additional soils and vegetation introduced to the stream bank area. The DuPont Remediation Group has discussed the concept of the stream bank remediation with the city and city staff and relevant regulatory agencies for more than a year. And during that time, DuPont has attempted to address various concerns raised by city staff and other interested parties. Our principal concerns include the loss of established streamside vegetation, tree canopy, and damage to aquatic habitat, diminution of recreational and aesthetic enjoyment of the river, impacts on current and future city infrastructure, and finally, the diminution of current and future public rights or the granting of special rights to a private entity. The final site plan for this phase have been reviewed and approved by staff under its administrative authority as defined by the city zoning ordinance and stormwater management and erosion sediment control ordinances. The plans are also subject to review and approval by Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and other relevant agencies through a joint permit application. Again, in this phase of work, the city owns the area that the remediation will occur, and we are responding simply to DuPont's request for a temporary access and construction easement. Chief concerns that the staff have worked through, I think, successfully with DuPont in this particular case involve our concern in preserving safety and security and operational consistency on our public works operation facility, and concern about existing infrastructure and facility conditions. DuPont has responded to those concerns, and you can see attached agreements that speak to those issues. Again, I believe we've negotiated and arrived at a successful conclusion for those items of concern. Additionally, by letter of agreement, DuPont is committed to installing a greenway trail subsurface course for public greenways that are located in areas adjacent to BMAs. The designated greenways are set out in a Greenway Development South River Trail master plan adopted by the city in December of 2001. Further, DuPont has agreed to construct a boat launch in North Park. Subsequent to this meeting this evening, at our September 25th meeting, City Council will be asked to conduct a public hearing and consider adopting a resolution granting a permanent easement to facilitate ongoing maintenance and monitoring of the remediation project areas. Mr. Michael Liberati of the DuPont Remediation Group is present this evening and can address any additional questions you may have concerning the proposal.
Anybody have any questions of Mr. Hamp? If not, I'll hereby open the public hearing.
No one has signed up to speak.
I don't really think we have any more. Y'all went through this extremely in depth, so I think we've covered all the angles, and unless there's any questions that anybody here or any concerns we would have.
But I think for the benefit of the group, I kind of went through the presentation without referencing the presentation of a map, and you can see Bridge Avenue in the lower left-hand corner of the plat. And the large building there is the Public Works Operations Building. The square hatched areas are access easements that will allow DuPont to obviously drive equipment and locate manpower to accomplish the remediation work. The hatched areas with a single diagonal line are the remediation areas. And you can see there are 2 such areas on our property there, just for orientation.
The one question I do have is, once these projects are done and the improvements are made, would they be regularly scheduled a review? And if they are in need of additional work, will that be our responsibility?
So yes, they are part of DuPont's obligation in fulfilling the statute is to regularly monitor the facilities to make sure the remediation efforts are functioning as intended, and to the extent that they are not, or they become damaged in any way, either by nature or human activity, it's DuPont's obligation to repair them.
Then, when would work is being contemplated in terms of the start date, and then how long might the remediation efforts take place?
The start date, I understand that DuPont would like to begin as quickly as possible, and I do not know what the duration of this particular phase is, but Michael can tell us. 4 months.
4 months.
He's holding up 4 fingers, so 4 months.
4 days. We have 4 days. No, 4 months. 4 months. And so I guess for the benefit of just the public too, so where this work is very similar to that effort that was just recently completed last year over in Constitution Park.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And everything went good there, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, yes, sir.
Looks good, so. All right, anything else?
No, sir.
Then I'll hereby close the public hearing. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any other questions? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Thank you.
I'd just like to add appreciation to staff and DuPont for working on a very complicated issue for so long and for seeing it through. So thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you. Item 5A is to receive a report regarding the potential development of a public park in the city's former landfill site in the vicinity of North Winchester Avenue. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, some time ago, the City Council directed the staff to develop a plan of development for a public park to be located at the former city landfill off of North Winchester Avenue. To that end, the city engaged Wiley Wilson and their partners, Land Planning Design Associates, to be able to provide you with a specific design recommendation with cost estimates. As I recall, there was some direction that we develop a bare bones plan for being able to open the park, and as we got into design work, we interpreted that to mean that there would have to be a safe, adequate road through the park and to the overlook at the top, that we are cognizant that we still run a landfill post-closure operation under the direction of Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and we would have to address the DEQ's concerns. But as well, I think we looked at it and said that there would need to be entrance improvements, some sort of directional signage, some sort of a way of bringing people off of North Delphine or North Winchester to the site through the area that's currently a recycling center, through the area where we currently house different parts of the refuse operation, garage, garbage trucks, and that sort of thing. And then ultimately that at the overlook itself, we feel as if there would need to be some improvement made to create a more user-friendly, programmable space. We think that there certainly are more things to consider that could be done at the park, but if I'm to be candid, I would tell you that this is a project that is very susceptible to scope creep. In other words, I think it makes a lot of sense to contemplate that you could have restroom facilities and some sort of shelter or pavilion, which would really create a space that people would then adopt this as more than just an overlook and really a public park space. That we've talked about the potential development for biking trails and so forth. But we've also gone as far as at one point to talk about zip lines and climbing walls. And so at some point, I think you'll see that we tried to rein ourselves in, and I believe that we've brought you a recommendation that is both sensible, but also, I think, forwards, hopefully, the intention of the council and the community. I would simply encourage that as you look at the proposal that we've brought to you tonight, that you consider that the city, and I know you realize, has a unique and rare asset in this property, and that I think that we have the ability and opportunity at this point to create a project of such quality that it would really distinguish it and the city of Waynesboro in our region, and that it would be consistent with the theme of outdoor recreation that we've tried to create and enhance here in the community. With that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Bill Metchnick, who works for LPDA, and Mr. Fred Pribble, who works for Wiley Wilson. They're going to walk you through the design recommendation, and talk about some of the cost estimates. And then if it's the council's pleasure, I think I'd like to have some conversation about next steps and direction from the council.
Thanks so much, Jim. That was a great introduction. Again, I appreciate being here tonight. This was a wonderful project and a wonderful opportunity to work with your all staff, your leadership, your public works, your parks department. It was really an honor and a pleasure, and it was a great group to work with. They're efficient and to the point, and they get things done. Fred did most of the work. I just got to draw a lot of nice pictures through the process. I had a lot of fun doing it and coming up with some good ideas. I'll go over a little bit about the process and kind of where we ended up and why, and then Fred's going to cover some of the other technical details about the final engineering. Existing conditions of the landfill. Most of you all are familiar with that, but this is the landfill property proper. This is the actual landfill part, part of the landfilling with the garbage under it, administered by and governed by DEQ. I'm not out of time already, am I? I don't know what that noise was. This part of the property, it was unutilized for landfill, so that is suitable for other types of development, for park development. That's actually not a landfill cell. Up in here, here's the water tower. Here's North Delphine Avenue, which is, one of your main gateways into town. Here is North Winchester. That feeds into the park entrance road or the landfill entrance road, as well as 6th Street. And this is your recycle center. You can see a picture of that there. And this is the main road. This was your compaction building, which is here. This is where Jim was talking about a lot of trucks and things and storage happening around this area. Your scale house is right about there, I think. The railroad is here. Here's your entrance road, comes up. There's kind of a little overlook here, and then there's a parking lot at the top. Here's the entrance road on that side. And this is all wooded, wooded and revegetated area where there's some existing trails. It's beautiful property. The woodlands are pretty unique. There's some unique vegetated communities on this back property, as well as I mentioned some of the trails and lots of signs for turkey, but it's probably too late for me to get in there and do a little turkey hunting, but maybe Dwayne could get me in there. I don't know. This is really what it's all about, though. You get up to the top, and as you guys know, it's a beautiful view over the city, and that's really what this plan focused on, was the essence of boiling that down and how do we take advantage of that view for the public. The process really was to not reinvent the wheel. You guys started out with a great community vision. Virginia Tech Community Design Assistance Center helped you create a good vision for the plan. It was far-reaching, though, way into the future, so we needed to distill that plan and figure out what really of it, as Jim said, is the most implementable now, so we can move move the ball forward and move that vision forward. The process involved sort of a lot of prioritization workshops and discussions with your staff and with council members, where we really distilled things into priorities and discussed what the priorities would be for the plan, which we talked about. So you can see that matrix over there. Getting to that overlook, getting to that viewpoint was really, the number one priority. How do you identify it? How do you make the public aware of it? How do you celebrate it? How do you get folks there? And then what do they do when they get there? And how can we provide a safe experience and a meaningful or length of stay for when people get up there? So we refine this. Bless you. We refined the concept based on that input and develop a plan, and then we had review meetings with staff again, looked at costing. Fred Pribble and his engineering staff and staff from I love the ringtone. His staff from Draper Aiden Associates had worked on meeting with DEQ and specifically discussing the plan with DEQ to make sure that it was approvable in the context of the regulatory environment of DEQ regulating the landfill. And that turned out pretty well. Fred will talk about that some more. And then we developed a phase 1 implementation plan off a base of what staff thought they could bite off and chew and swallow as far as implementation, and then maintenance even long term we looked at. So here's the overall concept plan. It might be a little hard to see, but this is again North Delphine, North Winchester, 6th Street. This is your recycle center. So the plan really involved identifying that main entrance. Here's the railroad bridge that goes over North Delphine. So really creating more of a gateway out of this entrance for the park itself and even the neighborhood, creating more defined access and signage. Maybe even looking at a sculptural element. I was kind of excited to see your the one development of the sculpture on the picture that you all were talking about with the steel company. Looking at some kind of a sculpture here to identify the park. That was also in the plan. Sort of fixing up your gateway, reutilizing or repurposing the main scale house as part of the park, entrance. And creating some security there in terms of being able to secure and close off the park and during the nighttime would be an important feature. So that would happen down here. Reutilization of the bailing facility, potentially for even public bathrooms in the future. So that you could have a lower, say, trailhead and public restrooms that you could use while you're using the trail system that surrounds the park to get up to the top. So you could park down here and actually use the trails, walk or bike or whatever, to get up to the top to the overlook from down here. Improved access, entrance road, potentially using VDOT rec access funds, grant funds, to really shore up. I don't know if many of you have driven up this road recently, but it is a little bit wore out, and there's some ruts and gravel, and you might, if you don't have a truck, you might bottom out in a couple places. So that would be fixed up, obviously, some drainage improvements. But the real magic happens up here. Really better defining this parking area, defining a specific entrance point to an overlook. We actually walked this area quite a bit, walked all around here and identified the most obvious spot for the best, overlook. It's not rocket science. You guys go up there and you'll know where that spot is too. It's a natural spot right here. We also identified, this is really something Dwayne showed us, your Parks and Rec director, when we came up. We walked out to this point, and you get a secondary view towards the mountains and towards the interstate as the interstate goes up over Afton Mountain. So it's another great viewpoint. So we looked at creating a secondary overlook here. At the end of the trailhead would be a sort of a gathering plaza and a information kiosk, and flanking either side of that, Jim mentioned it, but either side of that in the future phases could be an event pavilion, which set up off this view, as well as an adjacent event lawn and the plaza. So it would be very multifunctional. And the other side of that, kind of tucked in the wood line, could be a comfort station, which would include bathrooms and things like that, with trailhead access to your trails, a lower trailhead, and the associated signage. So a little blow-ups here, maybe it's a little better to see, but you can kind of see that entry area, the entry road, we talked about that. These green sort of lawns are event lawns, meadow area. We're talking about creating a lower link to the lower parking area with an access road, because the current access road is very steep, excuse me, and kind of buggers up this whole entrance sequence at the end. So we're proposing to kind of flip it from the other side. You already have a road that comes down here to access the water tower. So we would add a piece of road here to access this lower trailhead. So again, here's the secondary overlook. You can see the two buildings a little bit better here as proposed, in the plaza and the kiosk in the center. So it really kind of distilled, the vision plan into, okay, how would these things really work, on this site, and how would that look in reality? All these plans were done to scale. I know they look a little sketchy here, but they're all done to scale. We looked at grading, materials, did quantity takeoffs for cost estimates, and things like that. Excuse me. So ultimately, if you could kind of switch back and forth, it boils down to what can we implement in phase one. And the consensus with the group was really to, again, focus on that view. What do we really need to do to get folks up to the top and get them to experience that view and start using the park, as well as to provide some amenity for when they were there. We decided not to spend a ton of money at the lower entrance area. We just need enough landscape and signage to identify that entrance area and make it safe for folks to get in. The recycle center would still function kind of as is for a while until we figured out exactly what the recycle center wants to be, when it grows up. And then just, again, improving this entrance road, some minor improvements to the scale house, removal of the old scales, dressing up of the building, basic paint, things like that, some signage and adding gates, improving the road up to the top, excuse me, the parking lot, the main overlook, trails out to the secondary overlook, this lawn area and the small plaza and the turnaround. And there would also be this piece of access road down here to the lower trailhead, just making that work. And then potentially some gateway elements for identifying the trailheads. Could be a bike sculpture or a pedestrian sculpture, because there's going to be two trail systems here. Folks are going to want to bike and mountain bike up here as well as hike and walk. So ultimately, the Parks Department will be looking at the system of trails as it navigates this property and making sure that that's safe and a good experience for each type of users, both bikers and hikers and pedestrians. So that's the basic plan concept for the whole park in phase one. We also looked at the types of elements, the look and the feel of the park, how it would be designed. Excuse me. The general consensus was that a good approach would be Blue Ridge Parkway-esque, but with a sort of a landfill junkyard chic, attached to that. So if you can imagine that, we would like to use recycled materials as much as possible, recycled concrete, sidewalks even for stone walls to mimic stone walls that might be on the Blue Ridge Parkway. We would use recycled concrete. Coarse 10 steel for guardrails and railings and things like that. But again, using as much appropriate, recycled materials as we can. But again, to create more of a look that's really Waynesboro, reflects, your proximity to the parkway, but also reflects the past industrial nature of the park and the use as a landfill, and the concept that we're trying to reuse and recycle and repurpose things for the future.
Thanks, Bill. Bill gets to talk about all the exciting stuff, and I get to talk about all the dull engineering kind of stuff. We met with representatives from DEQ, with Ross. I think the meeting went very, very well. They're extremely supportive of the project. They'd like to see a park up there, but obviously, because they are a regulatory agency, there are some things that they would like to see that the city do. And most of them are pretty darn easy from a park standpoint. One is the groundwater monitoring wells are already fairly well protected. They're locked. They're very easy to find. The gas monitoring wells and collection system protect that as well. If you've ridden out there, you can see some of the gas system is above ground. They want that buried because then people can't walk around it and mess with it. And one of the really important things to them was limiting access to the actual landfill site itself. And if you saw the plan that Bill put together, there aren't any activities planned along that existing road. So you come in the entrance and you go all the way to the top where it wasn't a landfill. So the way of limiting people on the landfill is pretty much saying you go from point A to point B, there's nothing in between. If you remember driving up there, there's an existing overlook where you can stop, and that's actually going to be eliminated, so there's nothing at all that will encourage people to stop along the access road. Meeting their compliance requirements, which the city's working really well on and doing a really good job on the gas system. And as we move forward with this, there is a requirement to revise your post-closure plan to address the fact it is being utilized as a park. But I think the really positive thing is they like to see it happen, and they're very supportive of that. Of course, we always have to get down to dollars. And as Bill said, we worked on this. We did estimates for all the different phases for the full entire project. You can see the number. And some of the differences in phase one, like when you get to the top, the destination point, in the full project, the sidewalks between, or the paths between the main overlook and the lower overlook are going to be paved block. In the phase one, they're going to be rock dust. Still going to be handicap accessible, but obviously there's a huge difference in cost between putting rock dust down and putting pave. In the phase one, we're not including the comfort station. We're not including the pavilion, and we're not doing any improvements to the lower parking lot. So the important thing in there, we're getting people up there. There's a minimum amount of landscaping in phase one. And like Bill said, that we're doing just a minimum amount to get people up there when you come into the actual entrance. So significant difference between doing everything on the plan versus just doing phase one. Does not include doing something or renovating the baling facility or anything like that. That's way down the road. If you wanted to look at some enhancements phase one, you look at potentially bathrooms at the top in the comfort station, a pavilion, maybe some additional enhancements to the entrance to attract people there, especially if you're getting people coming from other places for some of the events. The biggest one is when you're going north on Delphine, you go under the bridge and you're immediately there at the park. So if you have more there, it would be easier for people to realize, hey, this is the park. And then some additional landscaping actually at the top and along the actual access road itself. One of those additional landscaping points would be if you're at the baling facility, you can see the railroad, and putting some buffer along that area. So that's our presentation, and we're certainly here to open up for any questions, and hopefully we can address your questions. Thank you.
Any questions?
No.
All right. Thank you. I think at this point, Mr. Shaw just wanted us to try to give a recommendation of which way we want to go in the funding on it, correct, Mr. Shaw?
Yes, I think we would certainly appreciate any feedback that the council has this evening, and then thoughts about moving forward, and whether, at about $1 million, what we've conceived as phase 1A, you would like some recommendation as to how that might be funded, or for expanding the project to include all or elements of phase 2, or really, again, some feedback as to whether you're satisfied that we brought you the kind of project you'd hope to see. And if so, then I think we can have a conversation about next steps, which would really be to begin to pursue design engineering on whatever plan that you decide is worthwhile, and then thoughts about funding.
Want to lead off?
Well, I'd definitely say that. I mean, I think this project is, I have, in the community, I've not heard one person that has not said that this would be a wonderful asset for our community. And when you look at the scope and scale of the overall cost for the full implementation versus a phase one, while I can appreciate more of a step process in it, I also sort of have the recreational access fund grant figures in my head, to the tune of about $500,000. So that program, if leveraged and if we were successful with it, would drop overall city expenditures to 25% from what we're seeing this evening. So I think I would be supportive of asking staff to go and, while we're not committing the $2 million this evening, instead go back and examine how might we get there, and so that we can actually deliver a fully realized project, rather than that. Again, we're talking about if the recreational access funds were accomplished, we would be looking at a savings of 25% that we're seeing on the screen, and an additional $500,000, and you've delivered the entire project all at once, which I think would be very exciting. And you could only imagine the number of events and how busy that facility will be. I think of the mountain bike park out in Harrisonburg that literally every weekend is nearly packed with folks going out there and doing mountain biking. And our proximity to at the base of a national park, we always talk about our community for many, many generations have talked about how we pull folks off of the national park and what sort of resource and experience might they realize in Waynesboro. And I can't think of a more suitable project that we could leverage that appeal and really make something that sets us apart from any of our neighbors in the region. So that's what I would offer.
Thank you. Anyone else have comments?
Go ahead, Pete.
Go ahead.
No, I would say that I agree with Mr. Short that I would like to see that as well, the whole project. We just were told last week how important the recreation, what we have to do to sometimes catch up and stay ahead in some places, and I think it'd be a good project.
Yep.
So we need to see through.
Mr. Marks?
Well, I guess question directed to Mr. Shaw, or would this project be eligible for grant money or VDOT money or anything to provide some of the funding?
I think it would be. As I understand it, the recreational bearing in mind that the road work portion of the park is about $356,000. So as I understand it, the recreational access funds provide up to $250,000 of funds without a match, and then another $100,000 if you match that dollar for dollar. So that would, as Mr. Short points out, really reduce the potential costs there. And then as well, there are potentially some smaller grants that could be had through Department of Conservation and Recreation. Having said that, those are competitive grants. And what I would encourage the council is to say, well, if you consider the full value of this project, are you willing to buy the full value of the project? And if yes, then you figure out how to finance that. And then if you receive grant funds that either enhance what you might otherwise have done, or allows you savings that could either be spent on other projects or recycled back into this project, then you do so. But I would simply urge that the council say whether or not you think this project is worth $1 million or $2 million and buy into that without half measures. I think it's a risky proposition to go into a project like this saying, well, we'd be willing to do it if somebody paid for half of it or paid for 2/3 of it or 1/3 of it or whatever. And say, yes, if there are grants out there, the expectation is that the city staff will go and get grants to either enhance the project or create savings for the city in the project. But certainly there are a couple of sources to directly answer your question that as Mr. Short points out, the VDOT Recreational Access Grant could really be a big help. And I think some of the DCR grants could be, smaller sums, but certainly enhance the project.
If we support phase one, what uses will we get out of the park without completing, the full project?
I think in the phase one project, you get certainly an enhanced entrance to the park, clean up that entrance, a more obvious gateway for visitors. The road itself would be a paved road. There are then improvements that would be made at the overlook area so that there could be, some brick pavers and stonework, that sort of thing, to create a place where you'd get out of the car and actually congregate. The lower overlook area, we call Lower Meadow, would be an area that could be an activity center. And then there would be trailheads that would lead to the wooded property that's to the east. The rest of the balance of this property actually is a fairly pristine woodlands. And we've had some interest on the part of a local mountain biking association to create biking trails there. And there are already some walking trails on the property. So there would be ways to access those. What would not be, and there would be some landscaping. As Mr. Pribble points out, one of the things that DEQ would expect is that we make it obvious to visitors that that road is simply access to the top. They're not asking that we put a fence up, but that we're doing things to make sure that people drive to the top and get out there. And then the other element of it, as Mr. Pribble points out, a fairly significant dollar value, $160,000 to $175,000. That's work that needs to be done to the gas wells themselves, to bury some of the equipment that's up there primarily, so that equipment can't be tampered with or create a nuisance or hazard for visitors. It doesn't include comfort station restroom facilities. It does not include any sort of a shelter or pavilion. I think those two things were about $260,000, $270,000. I think they make a big difference as I think you can imagine the length of stay for a park visitor really increases as you have shelter and restrooms. And there would be a great deal more landscaping and more hardscape at a higher dollar value. In other words, some of the trails would be some sort of a crushed stone rather than paved in the area right around the overlook. I think one thing to consider, and I really don't want to distract our conversation, but that the recycling center as it is today will necessarily change to come in compliance with some stormwater regulations. That currently we have open containers where everybody throws their recycling. And to come into compliance with the MS4 permit, those bins are going to have to be covered in some fashion. As it stands now, rainwater can seep into the bins, and then whatever waste materials are still on cans and bottles can leach out into the parking area there. So I think in the future that recycling center is necessarily going to change, and in the phase 2 improvements, there was a lot more work done around the recycling center in anticipation of that. Does that answer your question, Connie? Yeah.
The restrooms, there's talk about using the existing building at the bottom. Is this in Phase 2, or the
Yes.
complete get restrooms up on top also, or just down at the bottom?
It could be either, but the restrooms I was talking about are at the top, that the plan actually inserted restrooms in a pavilion at the top. Phase 2, I think there's more work done to evaluate and perhaps reprogram the building at the bottom, which could include restrooms. And I think it's a little bit, it's yet to be seen. I mean, we had some conversation about whether you could put restrooms at the bottom and then continue to use the facility for garage for the refuse trucks. I think in the long run, there's some desire on the part of the Public Works Division to relocate those trucks anyway, but that's not contemplated at this point.
Okay. Any other questions? Seems like we'd like to look at the whole project as a whole, kind of move forward. You said do some more information about the funding part of it, a discussion we can have later, but I think we like to move forward to the park. We just maybe not 100% yet to doing the whole project, but I think once we talk about funding and other items, we might be able to get there. And is that kind of consensus here? All right.
I think just so that council isn't caught unawares, that one of the key decision points is how committed you are to paying for this with cash, because you certainly at $1 million could figure out a way to pay cash for the project. And then I think it gets more and more difficult to pay for the project with cash beyond that. Not to say that you couldn't or shouldn't do it at all. I think that, as we look towards sort of a package of improvements for the community, at least in the mind of the staff that's worked on this project and that's been working on your comp plan, this rises as a priority project, and that we can figure this out.
We'll get into the conversation of the nuts and bolts of the financing at another meeting.
That having been said, Mr. Mayor, I do want to put a plug in relative to financing that on October the 7th at 6 p.m., the Parks and Rec Department is going to be hosting Harvest Dinner at Sunset. And it's a dinner with microbrews, and it is, again, an effort to raise money to devote to this project. It's $80 a person, a bargain at that, and I would encourage folks you can go online on our website and get more detail, or call the Parks and Rec Department for more detail.
All right.
I think that's actually another great example of, so the folks that have seen this, the Harvest at Sunset event have said, we want to do more events. I mean, the groundswell of support for it, I think, kind of speaks to the quality of the project and the desire to see it materialize.
I think it's so unique that it behooves us to move ahead with as much as we can and to make it something that the public can use and will, really appreciate.
Completely agree.
Saying that, we'll move ahead to item 5B, and to consider adopting a resolution designating the city's former landfill site in the vicinity of North Winchester Avenue as a public park. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, as we discussed, the VDOT Recreational Access Grant would be probably certainly the first grant opportunity that we would like to pursue. We've had some conversation already with the VDOT staff, but one of the requirements to make application for the recreational access grant is that it provides recreation to a public park, and that's something that would be required of the council to designate this as a public park, and then we would include it in our inventory to the Virginia Department of Conservation Recreation. I want to be clear that the designation does not open it to the public immediately, that this is still a managed landfill site and it is not open to the public, and the simple designation wouldn't open it, but it would allow us to begin to pursue a specific grant opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Are there any questions from council? If not, is there a motion to introduce, to adopt the resolution?
Move.
Thank you. I think Mr. Freeman was first. Is there a second?
Freeman is fast.
Second.
He is fast. Is there a second, Mr. Marks?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Always second.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Item 6A is to consider adopting a resolution establishing the Personal Property Tax Relief Act rate of the relief for the calendar year 2017. Mr. Hamp.
Ladies and gentlemen, in 2004 and 2005, the General Assembly enacted legislation and budget amendments that altered significantly the manner in which the Personal Property Tax Relief Program, or car tax program, is administered at the state and local levels. The administration of the PPTRA for Waynesboro requires the City Council to adopt annually a resolution establishing the rate or percentage of relief for qualifying vehicles. The resolution presented for your consideration this evening establishes the rate of relief for qualifying vehicles at 50% for the 2017 tax year. The percentage of relief for last year was 52%. The amount of personal property tax relief distributed to each locality is determined by the General Assembly. The city receives more than $1.7 million annually until otherwise determined by the General Assembly. And the percentage of personal property tax relief afforded to the taxpayers may vary from year to year according to the assessed value of the registered qualifying vehicles in our city. Adoption of the resolution is necessary for implementation of the PPTRA program, and I recommend that the council adopt the resolution establishing 50% as the rate of relief for the 2017 tax year.
Is there any questions of Mr. Hamp? If not, is there a motion to adopt the resolution establishing the PPTRA rate of relief at 50% for the calendar year 2017?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Is there any other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Item 7 is communications and correspondence.
Yes, sir. I have a few items this evening. First, just an FYI that I have approved administratively an application for a special event. That's Dance Walk Waynesboro, organized by Ms. Kathy Johnson. The event will be held on September 26th with a rain date of October 10th. An event will occur from 10:30 a.m. approximately until 11:30 a.m. The application specifically requests amplified music for downtown, and that will accompany dance walking on our public sidewalks. The event is free and open to the public, and the event has been occurring for several years. I just wanted to make you aware of that. If you see people having fun dance walking to music on our sidewalks. You'll recall last meeting that we had a couple of residents express concern, and the council requested follow-up by staff on those items. The first being concerns regarding activity at 260 Port Republic Road. I think those concerns pertain to unpermitted construction or maintenance work. The building official visited the site and reported actually that no permits for work had been issued for 260 Port Republic Road, and the office was informed of this work taking place on August the 11th, and specifically the individual reporting the activity referenced a stairway in front of the building. The resident also expressed concern about the number of vehicles belonging to residents parking on the street. So a case for unpermitted work was opened. The site was visited that same day, August 11th, and staff observed that the stairway had been recently painted and that stair treads had been replaced. No other work was observed or reported. A permit is not required for that activity, and thus the complaint was determined to be invalid and the case was closed. There is no off-street parking provided for the apartment building, and our belief now is that under the current situation, it should be considered and is considered a legal, non-conforming, or grandfathered use. A resident also raised concerns about activity at 212 Port Republic Road. It's the location of the Community Uprising facility. Our zoning administrator made an unannounced visit to the Community Uprising or community-bound church the week of September 4th and spoke to Ms. Debbie Warble, who's an owner there, about the activity reported. Staff did not observe beds or other evidence of overnight occupancy of the facility. Ms. Warble reported that they have had an occasional crisis situation where they've gotten calls in the middle of the night from people needing emergency assistance, and they've met them at the church, but did not reveal or indicate that they had housed individuals at the church overnight. I think our staff person pressed Ms. Warble for an example of what is a crisis, and Ms. Warble communicated that in the past that had gotten calls from females who were in abusive situations and looking for help, and they had worked to connect those individuals with the New Direction Agency in the region. There was also a question about the legitimacy of the facility being identified and zoned as a church. The owner reported to our staff that they conduct worship services there every Sunday morning at 10 and a Bible study every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. She said that they have also received material to initiate a women's study group one night each week. And so with that information and that visit concluded, at this time we do not find a violation of our zoning ordinance.
Can you go over the one detail about people sleeping overnight?
So one of the concerns presented was that by the resident that individuals were sleeping in the facility overnight, and that was serving as a shelter in that respect.
Because aren't they an extension to the warm shelter, or they were at some point when they were full?
That's correct, but we're not in the warm season presently, so
Okay,
there
so
shouldn't be
we're talking
individuals staying overnight there. So those are those items. Mr. Shaw covered the harvest dinner at Sunset. And before you depart, I'll pass along this pamphlet that was produced by the Historic Commission. It's entitled The History of Medical Care in Waynesboro, Virginia. And this is an activity that our Historic Commission performs periodically. They've identified various topics of particular interest in the community and produced these pamphlets. So I wanted to make you aware of their work in that respect. And that concludes the items that I have this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp.
Sir.
Next is citizens' comment period.
So, Ms. Velma Ryan.
Ms. Ryan, if you'll give us your name and address, please. If you'll watch the timer up here, please, and when it, while it's green, you're allowed to talk. When it turns yellow, please start to wrap it up, and once it turns red, please stop if you're still in the process.
Okay, that's why I had it typed out so I wouldn't ramble on, as I tend to do at times.
Okay.
Velma Ryan, 1007 Fairway Drive. And I'm here to let everyone know about the Friends of the Library book sale, which is coming up, starts next Wednesday, the 20th. On Wednesday, the 20th, it's for the friends. If you're a friend, you get in. Otherwise, you can become a friend at the door. $10 for a year, or if you want to, really save money, give us $100, and then you'll never have to pay again. But anyway, see, I'm talking small change here, not millions. But anyway, the sale starts on Wednesday, as I said. It starts at 12 o'clock and runs till 8. And you can buy, you can become a member at the door. The sale's open to the public on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. The hours are posted on our website, which is friendsofwpl.org. And also it's found in the newspaper, posters, and you can call the library. But it's the 21st, starting with for the public, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. The book prices range from 50 cents. See, I'm not asking for a lot of money here. You'd be surprised how it adds up, though, because we have thousands of books. And it goes up to $2 and $3, most of the better books. We divide them between bargain and better. The better books are 2 and 3 to 10 to 20. We have some really good collector books this year. So if you're a collector or if you want interesting books, come and look at our collection. Our library is one of the best anywhere around. It's one of the best libraries in the state. And one of the reasons is that the Friends support it. We support the programs, and For example, if you have attended a children's or adult programs in the big downstairs meeting room, if you sat in the chairs, the Friends bought the chairs. You used the tables, the Friends bought the tables. You speak at the lectern, the Friends bought the lectern. You hear the piano playing, the Friends bought the piano. We supply an astounding amount of things over the years to the library. If you need a copy made, the copy machine's ours. We keep the maintenance up. But anyway, that's what friends do. And you need to be a friend. We need more friends, so come join us. But anyway, let me go on to my next page. So come to the sale and help us to help the library. One more point that's really important. A lot of our books have been donated to us. And if you're going to donate books, please go through them and take your children's pictures out. I have a scrapbook, and if you're coming to the book sale, look at the scrapbook to see if you know anyone that's in there so that I can give the pictures back. In fact, I just took a great many pictures to I found out because there was a school picture, and it had the school on it. I called the school, and I said, where is this person? They said, oh, she's in high school. So I go to the high school and give the pictures back. So, because I can't throw them away. I simply cannot throw pictures away. So please be sure if you do not keep things in your book when you give them to us. Look through them at least. So that's all I have. So come to the book sale so that we'll have another successful year. Thanks.
Thank you. If they leave a $100 bill in there, you could take care of that.
In fact, I actually have $100, but it's from some foreign country that I never heard of.
Thank you.
I'd add, too, we don't have to say it's one of the best. It is the best library in Virginia, so hands down.
And if I can add to, the Friends work very hard throughout the year, so please come. And I get the pleasure of seeing the books come in, so.
Mr. Bill Hosrath.
If you'll give us your name and address, please, sir.
Bill Hosrath, 369 Walnut Avenue, Waynesboro. Several comments on Sunset Park. Congratulations. You're moving in the right direction, and you're moving fast. And that's what we need here. Waynesboro needs to change. We're in the process of change. Sunset Park is a big, big change. I grabbed the consultants and suggested that perhaps they add a biking, hiking lane to the road coming up, because I believe a lot of the people that participate in this park will be going on and may look to drive a circuit, hike a circuit, and to have a safe path to the top would be a good move. In the same vein of the enthusiasm for this park, I bring to your mind, because I, as a consummate cheerleader for Waynesboro, have seen with dismay the budget sessions year after year after year. And to look at a $2 million addition to our budget, even though it may be mostly cash and have some grants, and then to think about the ongoing cost of maintaining this, by my calculations, you're going to add a penny to your tax rate. So think about that. If you make this decision, which I'm all in favor of doing, and I support it and will not oppose it in any way, but think about what you're doing, because once you make that decision, then you've made that decision by default. So don't retreat from it after you've made it. I say again, do it. Don't wait around. In some of the planning sessions, one of the things that's awful about Waynesboro is it takes us forever to do anything. So why don't you surprise the world and do it? At the risk of my friend Dwayne's, and apparently all of council's, an $80 dinner for a public park? Are you guys now in the philanthropy business? I mean, for 20 years, I've been orchestrating, been participating, been part of fundraising events and dinners and all that. And one of the criticisms we've received at the Wayne is, well, gee, it's just for the rich people. Well, $80, guys, is not fast food. And I wish you all the success in the world, but I think Dwayne's time and his staff's time is a lot better spent on other items than philanthropy activities. You've got a whole community. You got the private sector, you got government, and you've got philanthropy. And we're the ones that are supposed to be doing the $80 dinners. You guys should be having barbecues if you want to bring your public and your taxpayers, the ones that are going to pay for it, up there. And I'd sort of chastise you from this standpoint. This is a public park. Don't charge me $10 to go see the showers at the top of the hill. It's a public park. It is now. It wasn't before. But don't charge me $10 to go on city property. Open it up to everybody. Get everybody up there. Get them all as enthusiastic as I am about your park. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne.
Ms. Tracy Straight.
If you'll give us your name and address, please.
Tracy Straight, 1816 Westminster Road, here in Waynesboro. And I just wanted to bring you all a gift, our new playbill. Even though all of our programming has been online for several months, we have it in print. And do you mind? Can I bring it to you?
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
I want to see you at the wedding.
I'll be there.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. That's it. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
We are adjourned. Thank you.